to start with the hot thing of the industry, which is the severe congestion in US West Coast. So I'd like to listen to your opinion about that, and if you believe that there are some possible solutions, or even some actions to facilitate the problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a great question. So, it's a very challenging problem, and I think what we see is that the congestion is it sort of starts all the way at the last mile, right? So, I've been doing a lot of reading and speaking to different industry players about this, and I think what seems to be happening is that there seems to be a shortage of labor throughout the entire chain. So you don't have enough of warehousing staff, manpower to actually process the cargo that's being delivered. There seems to be a shortage of trucks and truck drivers, and all of that is creating a big backlog that stretches all the way to the port, right? So if you don't have evacuation of containers, then obviously the ports themselves find it difficult to offload additional cargo. They are doing their best to get the cargo offloaded from the ships. That itself is a separate matter entirely about why the ships are backed up. And so, when you look at this entire chain and you start thinking about how can we possibly resolve this, I think what is really required, and based on some like I said, reading and speaking to experts, I think there is no clear and easy answer. But what would
Of course.
definitely help is moving the entire supply chain into overdrive. So we can't be thinking about only a targeted intervention just at the port, or just about the truck drivers, because if there's no warehouse manpower, then even if the truck drivers deliver, then they're not offloading the cargo and processing the cargo. If you solve for both of those, then you still have an issue at the ports themselves, which are struggling with their own shortage of labor. And I guess it's not a easy answer, or an answer that would excite most people, but I think the only way that we can really resolve this issue is having across the entire chain, the entire supply chain working on, like in turbo drive, working with a lot of speed and making sure that there are no bottlenecks in any part of that entire process. Because at any point, if you have a shortage, it's just going to jam up, and that's going to be the next topic of focus. Right now, we're talking about the ports. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about other legs of it.
Yeah, I see. But isn't there a core of the problem? I mean, of course, there are difficulties in several sectors, but which is, do you believe, the core of the problem? Is the shortage of containers? Is the shortage of drivers? The limited space on warehouses? The capacity management, let's say, from shipping lines?
Yeah, I
Or
mean, I wouldn't go and put this entire situation on any one of them. I mean, if you look at so what I can talk about is how we saw the India side of the chain play out. Which is actually, it's very very similar what we're seeing in US West Coast to what we saw in India towards the end of the first lockdown, right? Which is that there is all of this cargo that's lying at the ports. The importers don't really, I mean, a lot of them didn't have any great urgency of clearing the cargo, because they just looked around and they said, well, there's no real demand for all these product that I've imported, so let it stay at the port, and I'm happy to pay extra charges for it. So that was one segment of clientele. The other segment of clientele was desperate to get the cargo out of the port, but they were not able to get the trucks, because everyone, whatever truck driver supply there was completely utilized, and it just, the truck went to the highest bidder. So then you have a separate section of importers who want to clear the cargo but were not able to do so. And what we saw, this was in approximately, I will say, July to August of 2020. What we saw in India was that, it really required intervention across the entire chain. So the government had to take actions to, incentivize and give a lot of comfort to the truck drivers. Again, we're talking about the end of the first lockdown. So the interventions were slightly different. At that time, they gave a lot of comfort to the truck drivers about, the COVID situation, and having adequate support in terms of testing and being taken care of. So they had to invite the truck drivers back to work. The ports themselves started working on overdrive and made their own sort of interventions to attract the labor back into the market. And when the entire chain started really trying to boost their output and productivity, is actually where we started seeing like the evacuation of containers start happening. And honestly, it did not happen overnight. I think in the Indian scenario it took something like 3 months. The scales of the Indian problem are obviously much smaller than what we are seeing in the USA. So if I have to look at but the dynamics are very similar. So if I have to look at how that situation resolved in India towards the end of the first lockdown and what we're seeing in the USA right now, very similar dynamics, much larger scales. And I think we'd have to be looking at a supply chain that's working on overdrive for a very long time before this problem really gets resolved. And as I mentioned to you before, with the learnings that we
Okay.
saw in India, just focusing on one aspect of it is, I mean, you'll make some progress, but it's not going to work to resolving the situation at speed.
Yeah, I see. And what is the role of digital platforms like Freightwalla on this situation? Do you believe that digital platforms like yours could assist to the problem with some more fast bookings or something like this?
Yeah, so I think the way that digital platforms can really play a role in the international logistics industry today is in being very proactive and responsive to the problems of the market, right? So one thing that digital platforms do really well is proactively identifying problems before they really start uh, becoming all too problematic for the client, right, or the consignee. So if you are able to identify cargo that is at risk of delays, you are then able to start working on creative solutions for moving the cargo, right? So if you know that your cargo is, um, let's say it's stuck at the port, and it's been there for a few days, if your system is able to flag that in a meaningful amount of time, then you can actually work with the clientele to see how you can maybe reroute the cargo, maybe potentially take, maybe not call at some of the major ports, but call at some of the minor ports, right? um, think about different multimodal ways of moving the cargo, and all of this proactive problem solving is really done best with a software that's managing the entire chain. If you have, and if I just compare this with the offline industry, right, the more traditional players, of course there are many of them at large scales who are very good at what they do, but I think globally we all agree that the international logistics industry is quite fragmented. There's lots of small players who don't have a lot of process sophistication or a lot of technology backing up their operations. And when they are the ones who are handling all of these cargo movements, you are really very reliant on the quality of your freight forwarder. And again, I'm saying there are some very good ones, but there's also a lot of people who are just operating on legacy systems, and they are not able to be quite so nimble, quite so responsive to the supply chain. And that will mean that they identify the problems much later, which means you're already delayed in whatever problem solving you want to do, and that just worsens the outcome.
Okay. Have you seen any significant change in your traffic or in your customers' needs driven by this situation? I mean, by the global congestion, by the freight rates that are so much increased.
Yeah, so I think it depends on the specific industry that you go after, but we're seeing a few different trends beginning to play out. So if I look at the manufacturers of really high value cargo, so let's say high value electronics, or people who, or maybe high value textiles and garments, what they are looking for is, especially coming out of the pandemic, is they recognize that all of the challenges of the traditional way of operating, and they are really looking for a better type of logistics like provider, someone who can be responsive, someone who leverages technology to ensure that, their interests are being taken care of. So I think that there's been a huge surge in interest levels from them for digital players like ourselves. So that's one like big trend that I've noticed coming out of the pandemic. And the second big trend that I can talk about, which is, I guess, a little bit related to the drastically increasing freight rates, is we're actually seeing a lot of these exporters, and importers starting to really rethink the mode of their operations. So, let me give you a concrete example. So, if you are transporting low value cargo, let's say, agricultural commodities, and you're doing it in bulk, you have massive volumes. Maybe at one point of time when the freight rates were, a quarter of what they are today, you'd be very happy to move them in containers. But the way that these freight rates have shot up, we're also seeing a huge increase in demand for bulk shipping. So these players who have maybe 100,000 tons or 200,000 tons of material that they're looking to ship in a, at one go, will then start looking to, the charter market to see if they can avoid these problems of container shipping, availability of containers, space, congestion. I mean, there's so many issues. And so we're seeing them sort of start to leak away the demand that would be there for containerized freight, right? And I think that's what we're seeing in India is now a stabilization of the freight rates. I mean, globally also we've heard of some shipping lines talking about stopping the rate increases. But in India, we're also seeing that there's a segment of clientele that's just pulling away from containerized freight entirely, and that is also helping to stabilize the situation. Of course, I'm not saying that they'll never come back to container freight. I think this is just a transition phase and something we're seeing happen at specifically low value, high volume cargo. But it will take some time to play out, and I think they will now need to be incentivized and really cajoled to come back to containerized freight movements. So these are the two big trends that I've noticed.
Okay. Uh, can I ask for a comment about the increase on freight rates? I mean, which do you believe is the reason for this increase, and if there are some any potential solutions to uh, return to normal levels?
Yeah, I think obviously there's both things have happened at the same time. There's been an increase in demand as well. Coming out of the pandemic, there's a lot of global impetus for growth, and there's a lot of capital available to and demand available to actually move cargo across borders. So demand has increased, but and supply also at the other side of the coin has not been there. There's been I think a major reduction in supply for a variety of reasons. But if you ask me between both of these, which is the bigger driver, I would definitely say there's been a lot of supply disruptions with the pandemic. We know containers have been stuck all over the world. There's been a every time a port is under lockdown, we know that container movement is hampered drastically. Even if container movement doesn't come to a stop, the regular flow has reduced. That means that now there's a misallocation of containers around the world. Uh, when we were coming out of the pandemic, what we saw here in India was that, whilst India is also a big exporter because China is so much larger, any empty containers that were sitting here were being taken to China to be re-exported to the USA and Europe, right? So we saw a big whatever empty containers that were there, they were also being reduced from the Indian system and then became a roadblock for Indian exporters to move their cargo. So normally we talk about China to the world, and I think for the rest of Asia, which is also a manufacturing hub, this became an added complication. There's a lot of logic and a lot of reasons why the shipping line would look to do this, reallocate containers from India to China. I know it makes sense for them from their own P&L, and even from a global systems perspective. China is so much larger, so you want your empty containers to be in China. But all of these problems are basically why we see that the freight rates have skyrocketed so much. I mean, primarily I would say it's a supply side issue, and I think the resolution is it's slowly at least beginning to stabilize is what we are seeing. But the ultimate resolution, I think, is still some time away.
Okay. Uh, Okay, as Freightwalla is a digitalization project, let's say, I would like your comment about the progress on the digitalization of the shipping industry. You know, there are several experts that believe there is a low progress comparing to other sectors. What is your view?
Yeah, I think so. In terms of the progress of digitalization, I would say that it has been as Freightwalla as a company, the progress on the shipping industry has been, I guess, a little slower than we expected. So we started 4 years ago, recognizing that there is a lot of benefits that the technology could bring, and we have been actively pushing for both client adoption as well as integrations with the shipping lines. uh, we have now over the last 18 months started to see shipping lines build up their systems and slowly start making those systems available to other digital players to connect with and integrate with. But the progress has been slower. If we compare with other industries, I think logistics is, it's not the last industry to digitalize, but it's definitely far behind other industries. I mean, I can call out a couple of other industries which are even slower. You can say construction or mining or something. Again, depends on which country you're in. But yeah, logistics is not shipping is not the last industry to digitalize, but it is definitely a little slower and behind the curve compared to some of the others.
Okay. And what are your future expectations? How do you believe the digitalization process will continue?
Yeah, so the digitalization process, I mean, putting the speed of digitalization on one side, I think it is everyone in the industry has woken up to the benefits that can accrue to it, right? So if you can automate your processes, if you can reach out in a different form to your clientele through digital platforms and your website or custom built software, every player has a different approach. What you will find in the digitalization of shipping and international logistics is it actually works on both sides. It works on extra demand generation, so you need less people to reach out to the same number of clients, and you can service them better as well, right? So it helps improve your demand, it helps improve the client willingness to try you as a service provider. And on the other side, so if you look at your own internal operations, digitalization helps because you can then, once you digitize the process, you can then start automating it, which means that you can do more work for the same number of people. And if you look around the world, and I know again, really when we talk about this, we should be talking region specific, because the problems in Europe are slightly different from the problems in the North America, slightly different from the problems in Asia. They all have slightly different issues. But ultimately, what we're looking at is, if you are a logistics service provider and you are heavily reliant on manual processes of your own people, you are now, it's not even about the quality of your overall offering. Then you are then reliant on that individual's performance on a given day. If he has some issues, if he makes some mistakes, that ultimately means that you as a company will suffer, your client will suffer. And digitalization and automation helps smoothen out that process. It gives a highly efficient and reliable and consistent level of service to all of your clients, and helps you scale a lot in terms of your your operations as well. So it's really on both sides, and I think a lot of players have recognized that, and that's why we're seeing a big push now towards digitalization.
Do you see any drawbacks or challenges on the shipping digitalization?
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, so one thing that we spend a lot of time thinking about is, the world is such a big place, and you have different geographies moving at different speeds of digitalization. So as a digital freight forwarding company, how do you scale your operations, recognizing that some people might be automated and some of them are not automated? Some people have the technology, but they're not willing to give you API integration, right? So
Yeah,
I think
right.
those different speeds are something that, as a player who's actually trying to build a digital logistics service, You need to be thinking about how you can build a company and a technology platform that is as comfortable dealing in maybe a less digitized geography as well as an extremely digitized geography, right? And you're ultimately, the client is looking to you not because he looks at your technology and says, okay, I want the technology. He's looking to you and he comes to you because he says your technology is going to give me reliable and efficient logistics, highly consistent logistics. And it is for you as a company to manage the inconsistencies of different geographies. And not just, I mean, it's not just different geographies. Even within one geography, you might have, like, for example, the warehousing industry be extremely digitized, and then have the trucking industry have no digitization at all, which is something that you see in India, right? The warehousing
Okay.
industry has fantastic softwares, lots of tracking solutions, lots of analytics that they can provide to you. But then when you start dealing with the truck owners, there's very little that they can provide by virtue of, technology. So even within a geography and in different services, you need to be able to manage all of these inconsistencies, but still provide your client a very clean and reliable, consistent service at the front end. And I think this is like the number one challenge. So many different silos, either by geography or by service offering. And as a company, you still need to be able to manage all of these things and create something very consistent.
Okay, so you have to use some traditional actions while you try to make a more digital aspect of transportation.
Yeah, so actually, Antonis, what I would say is that we don't do traditional actions. We think about how we can bring digitalization to a traditional action.
Yeah.
So, for example, if your, let's say, the warehouse provider is fully digitized, then we just talk about connecting systems, easy answer. But if your truck driver is not digitized, then we think about what tech solutions we can build internally that will help us interface with him in a way
Mhm.
that we still get the standardization that we require whilst he does not have the technology. So we build it internally to help us manage the traditional processes.